The sheet of paper hit the floor like a verdict. No one touched it. No one spoke. But everyone heard it, the sound of humiliation sharp as metal slicing through the air. Sarah Whitfield stood there, her hand just releasing the edge of the boarding pass, belonging to Dr. Leah Morgan, 39 years old, senior cardiologist. Sarah's voice was icy loud enough for half the cabin to hear. "I need to take a very close look at your documents. Not everyone is allowed to sit here." She did not need to say anything about race. She did not need to say the words, "You do not belong yet." The meaning landed anyway. The cabin dipped into a quiet heaviness. Eyes slid over Leah like invisible security scans assessing, sorting, judging. Leah did not flinch. She did not react. She simply looked at Sarah with the eyes of someone who had seen this brand of condescension 1,000 times, wrapped in the polite packaging of procedure, a silent gaze carrying the weight of a decade spent saving lives in emergency rooms where no one had time to decide who deserved care. But on this plane, time was suddenly plentiful enough to decide who deserved to save whom. It did not begin with blood. It did not begin with the thud of CPR or the mechanical voice of an AED dictating life and death. It began with a tiny moment, small enough that most people would shrug it off. But Leah would not. She looked down at the boarding pass on the floor. A slip of paper dropped at the exact moment she needed respect most. A gesture small enough to be deniable, yet carrying the gravity of an entire history. She bent down to pick it up, not because she needed it, but because she knew moments like this were the seeds of the tragedies society loves to pretend it never saw coming. The business class cabin on the morning flight from Atlanta to San Francisco was unusually quiet. The engine hummed like the steady breath of a sleeping animal. Clean leather seats, generous legroom, warm amber lighting designed to make people forget the real world outside. A businessman in seat 2 Bravo typed on his laptop. An elderly woman stroked her silver necklace. A young man stared blankly at an action movie. Everyone had a story. None of them knew they were about to become witnesses in a confrontation no one could have imagined. Leah Morgan, with her neatly tied curls, deep blue blazer, and academic thin rim glasses, was not looking for attention. She simply wanted to sit down, buckle up and steal a few minutes of rest after 3 consecutive overnight shifts at Grady Memorial's cardiology department. She had barely touched her seat when Sarah appeared, as if her internal radar for misplaced people had gone off. "Let me check your boarding pass one more time." Not a question, a command, the kind issued by someone accustomed to ordering around those they assume sit below them. Leah handed it over, calm, not wanting to create a ripple. But the air was already wavering. Sarah scanned every line as if inspecting immigration documents of a suspicious traveler. She frowned and turned to her co-worker. "Do you think she might have read the wrong section?" The phrase "read the wrong section" tugged at the corner of Leah's mouth. She had correctly interpreted rare and complex cardiac complications for 15 years, yet to Sarah she might have misread a seat number in row 2 of business class. Polite condescension masquerading as customer service. Leah did not respond. She observed the way she would observe a patient whose symptoms were quietly evolving. In the next seat, Franklin Hayes, 67, retired high school teacher, watched the scene with sad eyes. "You are not the first," he murmured, as if afraid to shatter something fragile in the air, "but I hope you might be the last." Leah gave him a faint, exhausted smile. "We all hope that." But they both knew Hope had never been enough to change a system. Sarah finally returned the boarding pass, but the way she handed it back, not touching it, not looking at Leah, no thank you, offered, felt like tossing someone's dignity back at them. Leah sat down, back straight. Composed, but inside her chest something tightened. Not fear, not anger, but a cold intuition that this was only the beginning. Franklin coughed softly, a wet, heavy sound, and rubbed his chest. Leah glanced over. Subtle signs appeared instantly in her mind, like clinical code, slight paleness, slower breathing, a tremor in his fingers. "Are you all right, Mr. Hayes? Just some indigestion. I ate a spicy burrito at the airport. My own fault." He chuckled gently, the kind of elderly humor meant to ease others, but Leah's eyes did not mirror his lightness. She saw a pattern, shifting the beginning of a dangerous curve on an ECG. Leah was about to ask more when Sarah returned with drinks. Her smile for the white passenger ahead was bright as cabin lighting, but when she faced Leah, the smile vanished like a switch flipped off. She placed the cup on Leah's tray, not gently, more like delivering a verdict. No eye contact. No words. Franklin observed the moment, lips pressed thin. People can be polite to everyone, except the ones they have to try for. He whispered. Leah inhaled deeply and reminded herself, do not react emotionally. Not here. Not now. Because she knew a truth shared quietly among many black doctors. Once they label you as difficult, everything you say becomes unreasonable by default. The plane began to taxi. The seatbelt sign lit up, flickering like a warning for what was coming. Leah closed her eyes for a moment. She thought of the patients she had saved. She thought of the Hippocratic oath. She thought of the times patients asked, "Where's the real doctor?" She thought about a healthcare system that taught her how to save lives, but never taught her how to defend herself against bias. Her breathing was steady, but the rhythm of the story was not. Because in the seat beside her, Franklin's breathing grew heavier. One hand clutched his chest, and just as the cabin shuddered lightly along the runway, Leah sensed something clearer than the hum of the engines, a life slipping away, an injustice rising, a confrontation forming. No one in business class knew it yet, but the woman whose boarding pass had just been inspected like contraband, the woman deemed unworthy of sitting in row 2, was about to become the center of a battle that would force the entire aviation industry to change. No one knew. Not even Sarah. But they would. Very soon. The boarding pass was dropped onto Leah's seat a second time, this time not by accident. Sarah tilted her head, her voice loud enough for the cabin to hear the kind of emphasis used to remind someone they were stepping beyond the place others believed they should stay in. Leah looked at the small piece of paper trembling slightly in Sarah's hand, then at the calmly cold expression on her face. It was a silence aimed directly at her, needing no explanation. The air in the cabin shifted, as if the aircraft had tilted under the invisible weight of bias. Franklin Hayes still sat beside her, his breathing more uneven now, as if his body was trying to whisper a warning before he himself could understand it. Leah heard it, even though no one else was perceptive enough to notice. She sensed the change in Franklin's heartbeat at the exact moment Sarah continued speaking, with the tone of someone convinced she was following proper procedure. "I will call for anyone on board with medical expertise," she said. She glanced at Leah again, her eyes making it painfully clear that Leah's credentials were not worth considering. It struck Leah like a splash of ice water to the face, a direct hit to her dignity. Leah wanted to respond, but countless experiences of being underestimated held her still. Every black physician knew the truth. The moment you react, they will use that very reaction against you. Franklin suddenly leaned back in his seat, his dry lips parting as he fought for air, his right hand gripping the armrest. Leah leaned toward him, her medical instincts flaring so intensely her skin prickled. Franklin was no longer merely uncomfortable. He was deteriorating. Every biological alarm was flashing at once. Leah raised her hand to call for Sarah, but the flight attendant had already turned away, busy searching for someone with more expertise, a vague phrase that conveniently erased Leah from the equation. A young man, Evan Parker, stepped forward after Sarah's announcement, his face lit with the enthusiasm of someone who had never carried the weight of real responsibility in the face of death. "I studied pre-medicine. I used to be a lifeguard," he said. Sarah exhaled in relief, as if salvation had arrived. She positioned herself between Evan and Leah, like a door shutting out the person who actually knew what to do. Franklin's breathing quickened. His skin shifted toward an ashen grey. His chest tightened in desperate failing movements. Leah recognized the signs of cardiogenic shock instantly. She stepped forward, but Sarah raised her hand to block her, her voice cold and rigid. "Please let him handle it. He is permitted." The invisible blow struck Leah in the chest, not because she was being stopped, but because she knew that every wasted second was another heartbeat Franklin would never get back. Evan placed his hands on Franklin's chest, but they were in the wrong position. His compressions were too weak, too slow, too incorrect. Franklin's body curled in agony. The entire cabin held its breath. A broken gasp escaped Franklin's throat. Then his hand slipped from the armrest. A faint cracking sound tore through the air, a sound only doctors who have lost patients recognize. Leah felt it sharper than anyone. She could not stay still any longer. Not when a life was being sacrificed to arrogance disguised as procedure. Not when bias was killing someone right in front of them. Not when she was the only person in the cabin who truly knew how to save Franklin's life. And that truth, no matter how fiercely Sarah denied it, was swelling, growing heavier, ready to explode. Franklin began sliding across the fragile line between consciousness and darkness, and Leah knew with absolute certainty that if she did not act right now, the man beside her would never wake up again. The storm inside the cabin was only beginning to form. The tension was rising, and no one yet understood that they were pushing against the wrong woman, not until it was far too late. Sarah stepped back half a pace when Franklin began to convulse, but only out of fear, not because she realized she had been wrong. Evan panicked his hands, trembling violently as he placed the AED pads in the wrong position, then peeled them off, then stuck them onto another meaningless spot. The machine flashed error after error. Shrill beeps sliced through the air like warnings that a catastrophe was seconds away. Leah lunged forward, but Sarah blocked her again. Her arms spread like a barricade, her eyes radiating that false sense of authority she believed she had the right to wield. "I am ordering you to step back, immediately," Sarah snapped, as if handling an unruly passenger instead of obstructing a doctor trying to save a dying man. Franklin's convulsions intensified his head, knocking against the seatback with a dull thud. A strangled groan escaped him. Then a thin line of blood trickled from the corner of his mouth, red and watery, the unmistakable sign that he had bitten his tongue during the seizure. No one doubted the danger now except Sarah. Evan stepped back, his face drained of color. "I do not know what to do," he stammered. Leah heard each fractured word. She did not blame him. She blamed the system that had taught him to believe he was more qualified than an actual physician simply because he was not her. Sarah remained planted in place, as if Evan's confusion was somehow justification to keep Leah out. "I already told you we have someone assisting." "You are making this worse," she insisted. And in the exact moment she said those words, Franklin lost his pulse. Leah sensed it before the AED voiced it. His body slackened in a terrifying way. His eyes drifted half open. His chest no longer rose. The cabin fell into the deadliest kind of silence, a silence so heavy it felt as if all oxygen had been sucked away. From somewhere behind them, a voice broke through, trembling but furious. "For heaven's sake, let her do her job." Another passenger stood up, raising their phone. "I am recording everything. If he dies, this is evidence." Sarah scanned the cabin, finally noticing the fracture spreading through the business class aisle. But instead of retreating, she clenched her jaw as if pride meant more than a human life. "I am asking everyone to return to their seats. This is procedure." And in that precise instant, the AED spoke its voice, cold, mechanical, merciless, no pulse detected. "Begin chest compressions." The words rang out like a verdict, like a funeral bell, like evidence condemning Sarah in real time. Leah did not wait another second. She stepped forward. No permission asked. No explanation offered. No longer willing to wait for someone to grant her the right to save a dying man. Sarah tried to block her again, but Leah brushed her aside with such decisive force that Sarah staggered half a step back, not from strength, but from shock that Leah dared to push past her. Leah dropped to Franklin's side, checked his airway in one swift motion. His heart was silent, his chest still. No pulse anywhere. She positioned her hands correctly and began compressions, strong, deep, precise, the sternum echoing under her palms in sharp, rhythmic clicks that made a few passengers flinch. But that sound was not horror. It was hope. Evan stood frozen, watching Leah perform the technique he had only ever read about. Sarah stared, speechless, all her procedure and authority crumbling under the sight of real expertise. Leah looked toward the male flight attendant, standing behind them, his face tight with worry but not hostility. "Get epinephrine from the medical kit," she said, her voice cutting through the panic with a clarity so commanding it stunned everyone near her. "I need 1 milligram administered right after the 3rd cycle of compressions." Michael Turner hesitated for half a second, glancing at Sarah, then at Franklin's motionless body. His decision was immediate. "I will help," he said. Sarah choked on her breath. She wanted to object, wanted to say something, but nothing came out. Every pair of eyes in the cabin was locked onto Leah, onto her steady hands, onto the life she was forcing back into a chest that had already begun to fade, onto the undeniable truth that without Leah, Franklin would already be dead. Leah continued her own heartbeat, sinking with each compression, every movement, a silent rebellion against a system that had dismissed her too many times. After 2 cycles of compressions, Michael injected the epinephrine. Leah maintained the rhythm. The entire cabin stared at the AED screen. The silence stretched so long it felt endless. Then a faint flicker, a trembling waveform, a pulse, weak but present. The AED spoke clearly, heartbeat restored. A collective gasp rippled through the cabin, a sound of people being pulled back from the brink alongside Franklin. Leah sat upright, her hand still on Franklin's chest, her eyes fixed on the monitor. No one dared speak. No one dared touch her. No one dared doubt her. But the silence that followed was not peace, It was the calm before the storm, the moment before consequences ignite. Because what Sarah had just done, and what Leah had just saved, was about to set off a fire the airline had no idea it was about to face. The truth had found its pulse again, and it was not forgiving. Leah kept 2 fingers on Franklin's carotid artery, feeling a faint but undeniable pulse, a fragile thread keeping him tethered to life. She refused to let herself breathe in relief. A good doctor never trusts the moment that feels like it is over, not when everything can collapse again within seconds. The cabin remained stretched tight like a drawn string. No one dared move. No one dared speak aloud what everyone knew, that if Leah had not broken through the obstruction, Franklin would be dead. Leah looked up. Sarah stood 3 steps away, her face as pale as paper, her hand still gripping the radio handset, as if it could shield her from the truth. Her eyes darted around the cabin, searching for a justification, any excuse that might hide the fact that her actions had nearly cost a passenger his life. But there was nowhere left to hide. A small sob from the front of the cabin cracked the silence, followed by whispers spreading like wildfire, outrage, disbelief, fear and guilt from those who had stayed silent too long. A man in seat 3, Charlie, rose to his feet, his voice trembling but firm. I recorded everything. Not just the end. From the moment she stopped the doctor from helping. If anything happens to him, the airline is responsible. Sarah's composure slipped for half a second. I need you to sit down now. She shouted, her voice shrill with panic, stripped of the authority she tried to project earlier. But her panic only revealed the truth. Her power had only existed as long as no one dared challenge it. The man didn't sit. A middle-aged woman spoke up. You almost killed someone because of your pride. Sarah opened her mouth, but no words came. Evan, the young student, still stood frozen in place. His eyes were blank, his hands still shaking. He whispered almost to himself, I did not know anything. I do not understand why you did not let the doctor work. The words fell like a stone into the quiet, crushing the last remnants of the procedure excuse Sarah had clung to. Leah stayed focused on Franklin, but she felt the shift around her like a gust of air through a cracked wall in the structure of power. No one stood with Sarah anymore. Not a single person. Michael, the male flight attendant, stepped forward with an oxygen tank and monitoring equipment. His voice was low and steady, every word carrying the weight of a formal declaration. I will assist Dr. Morgan. Sarah spun toward him. You cannot just, Michael. Didn't look at her. Sarah, he almost died. And the reason was not Dr. Morgan. His words hit the fear she had been trying to bury. The truth was no longer in her control. Franklin stirred. A deep, weak breath pushed through his chest. Leah held his hand during that moment, the moment life quietly re-entered his body. He tried to open his eyes just a thin sliver, as if he wanted to acknowledge the person who had pulled him back from the edge. Leah leaned close. You are safe. I am here. Franklin blinked once, a small gesture but powerful enough to shred every false justification left in the air. The captain's voice broke through the cabin cold and clipped, We will be making an emergency landing in Denver due to a medical crisis. Please remain seated. Sarah went rigid. She knew an emergency landing was significant. It meant reports. It meant investigations. It meant procedural reviews. And most importantly, it meant witnesses. Leah did not step away from Franklin for even a moment. She knew that after a cardiac arrest, Stability was only the surface layer. Danger still churned beneath waiting. But as Sarah stood awkwardly in the aisle, Leah sensed something else, too. The collapse of a power built on bias. Not because she fought it. Not because she shouted, but because the truth had become too clear to deny. When the plane slammed onto the Denver runway, the cabin jolted. Passengers lurched forward, hearts racing. Leah braced a hand on Franklin's shoulder, keeping him steady. Sarah stumbled, gripping a seat back, as if the entire world had tilted beneath her. And then when the door opened, the EMT team rushed in. A female medic knelt beside Franklin. After only a few seconds of hearing Leah's rapid clinical report, she understood immediately who had led the resuscitation. She looked up at Leah with genuine respect. "Doctor, thank you for keeping him alive until we got here." Sarah stood just an arm's length away. She heard every word. She could not deny any of it. She could no longer rewrite the story. Passengers began clapping, not loudly, but one by one, each clap like a formal indictment. Leah did not look at them. Her eyes remained on Franklin as he was lifted onto the stretcher and taken off the plane. But she knew that moment marked the end of one thing and the beginning of something much larger. Sarah turned away, but Leah caught her eyes for a brief second. In that fleeting moment, she saw everything: confusion, fear, desperation, to cling to an authority that was already dissolving. And in that instant, Leah understood the truth. The real battle was not only about saving one man. It was about confronting a system that had nearly killed an innocent passenger because it refused to believe that the real doctor might look like her. What Sarah did not yet know was that her collapse had only just begun. Leah followed Franklin's stretcher to the aircraft door, but when the EMT team fully took over, she stepped back. Her body was still wound tight like a drawn bow, adrenaline running through her veins as if it had not yet realized the first battle was over. But the air behind her shifted, heavy, opaque, carrying the scent of trouble. When Leah turned, Captain Mark Doyle stood in the aisle, his face tense, and Sarah lingered behind him, slightly leaning to one side as if trying to hide behind her uniform. But her eyes did not avoid Leah. She looked at Leah with worry, thinly disguised as professionalism. Leah recognized it instantly. They were about to shift the blame. They were preparing to rewrite the story. She had just saved a man's life. But what they saw was not a doctor. It was a black woman who dared to defy the authority they believed belonged to them. The captain spoke with a forced calm so tight it turned into steel. "Dr. Morgan, I need you to stay. There is an issue regarding your behavior during this flight." A cold shadow spread across Leah's chest. She knew exactly what was happening. Franklin had just been saved, yet they still chose to do this. A man in the middle row shot up from his seat. "What are you talking about?" "She saved his life," an elderly woman cut in. We all saw the flight attendant block her. Sarah gripped her radio tighter, her eyes darting with panic. But no one stood with her anymore, not one person. The captain tried to reclaim authority with a low voice. "I need passengers seated. This will be handled according to procedure." The word procedure landed like a slap across the truth. Leah stood tall, meeting his cold stare without flinching. "What procedure requires preventing a doctor from performing CPR on a patient in cardiac arrest?" Sarah stepped forward, desperate to regain control. She disobeyed crew instructions. She created a safety hazard. "We are required to file a report." Leah looked directly into Sarah's eyes. The look was so cold that Sarah lost composure for half a second. "The only danger on this flight was you refusing to let me do the job I have done for 15 years. Evan stood behind them, his voice small but thick with guilt. She was right. I did not know how to handle that situation. Sarah whipped around, her eyes blazing. That was not your fault. But her voice trembled, because it was obviously her fault. As passengers began to disembark, a group of individuals in black suits appeared at the door. 2 of them wore FBI badges. A wave of whispers rolled through the cabin. The air changed color in an instant. Special Agent Melissa Grant stepped in her gaze, sweeping the cabin like a security scanner. "Dr. Leah Morgan, I need you to come with us for questioning immediately." A stunned breath spread through the cabin. Leah did not bow her head. She did not shake. She simply looked straight at the agent with a gaze that was neither defiant nor submissive. Sarah, however, exhaled sharply and stepped back as if she had been saved from a death sentence. But she was wrong. Nothing that had just happened saved her. It only exposed her further. Leah folded her coat calmly and picked up her bag. A young man called out, "We will testify." A woman added, "Do not let them blame you." An older woman stepped forward half a pace. "They are arresting the wrong person. Do not let them do this to you." Leah walked past them, each step steady, each footfall, marking the injustice they were trying to hide. Agent Grant walked ahead. Agent Ruiz walked behind. The airplane door closed behind Leah. But in that moment, no one realized that this closing door was opening a seismic shock. The airline, the crew, and even the federal system would not be prepared to handle. Leah stepped into the jet bridge, the white neon lights shining across her face. No fear. No trembling, only the cold calm of someone who knows the truth stands with her. She did not know what charges they planned to throw at her. But she knew one thing. This system had a long history of targeting the wrong people. And this time, they had chosen the most dangerous wrong person possible. Not because she was powerless, but because she was right. And when the person who is right is pushed into a corner, change begins there. Their next step would be to start a battle. And Leah's next step would be to stand firm until the truth forced its way into the light. The flight had ended, but the story had only just taken off. The metal door of the interrogation room closed behind her, producing a dry final sound that felt like a temporary verdict. Leah sat in the cold chair, her hands resting on the steel table, her breath steady but deeper than usual. Not from fear, but from forcing the last waves of adrenaline to settle so her mind would stay sharp. She knew this kind of room. White fluorescent lights, no windows, smooth walls. Not a place where truth was found, but a place where someone tried to force a version of the truth onto her. Agent Grant sat across from her, eyes sharp but not hostile. Agent Ruiz stood against the wall, arms crossed, his gaze as cold as if he were evaluating a suspect rather than a doctor who had just saved a life. Dr. Morgan Grant began, her voice flat to the point of emotionless. "We received a report stating you interfered with the flight crew and endangered the safety of the flight." Leah met her eyes without flinching. "That report is entirely false." Grant raised one eyebrow slightly, as if waiting for Leah to corner herself. "Then what would you like to present?" Leah did not blink. "I would like to present the truth." An invisible thread of tension hummed in the room. Ruiz pulled out a chair, sat across from her, and crossed his arms on the table. "You refused to comply with crew instructions," he said. "You overrode them in an emergency situation. You have to understand how that appears." Leah tilted her head. "And how does it appear Ruiz pressed his lips together. Like a threat. Leah offered a small, calm smile, the kind that makes people hesitate, because they suddenly question what they just said. The only threat on that flight was incompetence and bias preventing a doctor from saving a man in cardiac arrest. Grant watched her more closely now. Something shifted in her expression, subtle but clear enough that Leah sensed she was beginning to see a discrepancy between the report and the woman sitting across from her. But Ruiz did not see it. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Are you aware that disobeying crew commands is a federal offense?" Leah did not move. "Are you aware that preventing a physician from treating a patient in cardiac arrest is an act that can kill someone?" Ruiz clenched his jaw, but Grant raised her hand slightly, signaling him to stop. Clearly she realized the conversation was veering off course. "We have not concluded anything," Grant said. "But there is an official complaint, and we are required to investigate." Leah nodded once. "I understand, but I have an attorney. I will not be saying anything further until she arrives." Grant exhaled lightly and nodded. Ruiz was not pleased, but he knew the law. Leah took out her phone and dialed. Seconds later, the clear, commanding voice of Naomi Brooks filled the room through speaker. "Leah, I am on my way. Do not say anything to them. Make them wait." Leah ended the call. Grant folded her hands. Ruiz slammed a file down on the counter in frustration. No one spoke. But the air shifted again. It no longer felt like the sterile white of fluorescent lights. It felt like a dark, dense pressure where the truth was being bent somewhere out of sight. The door opened. A woman in a deep blue suit stepped in, confidence radiating from every movement, the face of someone who had won too many cases to fear anyone in the room. Naomi Brooks set her bag on the table, scanned both agents, then fixed her gaze on Leah. "Are you all right?" Leah answered softly but sharply. "They are trying to flip the story." Naomi turned to Grant, her tone cutting like a blade. "Before we begin, I want the exact legal basis for the FBI detaining my client." Grant replied, "Suspicion of interfering with the flight crew." Naomi let out a short laugh, not amused, the kind of laugh reserved for amateur lies. "You are suggesting that a physician performing CPR on a dying passenger qualifies as a safety threat," Ruiz interjected. She disobeyed instructions. Naomi pivoted toward him, her stare so precise that Ruiz stiffened. "If the crew issues an instruction that is incorrect, discriminatory, and endangers a passenger's life, then refusing to follow that instruction is not a crime. It is saving a life." Ruiz opened his mouth to object, but Grant quickly stopped him with a look. At that moment, Chloe Foster, the airline representative, stepped in. Her corporate, polite smile wavered just enough to reveal her anxiety. She tried to sound calm. "We would like to cooperate to resolve this misunderstanding." Naomi raised her hand. "We will speak later." "Not where?" "Not while my client is being treated like a suspect." She turned to Grant again. "We are leaving this room unless you have a legally valid reason to detain her." A long silence followed. Grant considered her options. Ruiz frowned. Foster held her breath, and Leah, sitting there quietly, radiated a quiet power sharp enough to reshape the room itself. Finally, Grant said, "She may leave, but we will need a formal statement later." Naomi gathered her documents. "We will contact you ourselves." Grant nodded. Ruiz did not look at Leah again. The door opened. Leah walked out into the bright hallway, Naomi at her side. But the hallway was not quiet. At the far end, camera flashes erupted, voices swelled, footsteps rushed forward, and then the calls, Dr. Morgan Leah turned. Dozens of people stood there, passengers from the flight airport staff, a few local reporters who had already arrived. A woman from Seat 7 Delta stepped to the front, her voice trembling yet strong. "We will testify. We saw what they did to you." A wave of agreement echoed down the hall. The entire corridor seemed to ignite with support. Naomi rested a hand on Leah's shoulder. "This is only the beginning." Leah looked toward the crowd, the lights, the voices, the rising anger from people who had been strangers just hours ago, but were now the most important witnesses of her life. Her heartbeat steadied. Firm. Focused. Because in that moment, she understood they had chosen the wrong person to blame. And they were about to pay for it. The storm was not coming from Leah. It was coming from the truth. And the truth had finally found its voice. Naomi had barely closed the door behind them when Leah's phone vibrated. An unfamiliar number from Denver Health flashed across the screen. She hesitated for a heartbeat, then answered. A calm, deep male voice spoke the kind carried by people who spend their lives standing at the edge between life and death. "Dr. Morgan, this is Dr. Daniel Cho, overseeing Franklin Hayes' emergency care." Leah's body tightened. "Is he? He is alive. And let me make this absolutely clear. He is alive because of you." Leah closed her eyes for a brief moment. Adrenaline surged back through her muscles, as if the battle had never ended. But Dr. Cho continued his tone, lowering firm as though he were signing a sworn statement. "And you need to know this before the media gets it. His condition is more severe than expected. The delay in initial treatment caused significant damage. Without your correct CPR, he would not have survived." Each word pierced the exact piece of truth the airline was desperately trying to bury. Naomi stepped closer, absorbing every syllable. Dr. Cho's voice grew even steadier. "If the airline attempts to place blame on you, I will testify. I will state precisely what happened and who caused him to nearly die." Leah's hand tightened on the edge of the table. The feeling rising in her was not relief. It was righteous anger finally given a direction. "Thank you, Dr. Cho. I will need that truth." The call ended. Naomi tilted her head. "We have an ally now." But that is only the opening move. Leah followed her out toward the public concourse, where the noise swelled like waves breaking against glass walls. A group of passengers waited, refusing to leave. When Leah appeared, they turned toward her in unison, as if they had been waiting for this exact moment. A young man approached, holding out his phone. "I have the full video of the flight attendant blocking you. I will send it to your lawyer right now." A woman clutching a handbag, still shaken, added, "They want to blame you." "But we will not let them." Leah said nothing. She did not need to. The solidarity surrounding her spoke louder than any statement. Naomi gently guided Leah through the crowd so they would not be trapped, but camera flashes erupted continuously. A reporter pushed forward. Voice urgent, "Dr. Morgan, is it true the crew prevented you from performing medical care? Were you discriminated against? Did the FBI detain you? Right after you saved a man's life." Naomi stepped between them. "No comment at this time. We will release an accurate statement soon." Leah remained silent, but inside her a fire was taking shape. Not the kind that blazes in fury and fades. The kind that burns slow, steady, unstoppable, capable of consuming an entire rotten structure. They left the airport and entered the waiting car. Naomi opened her laptop, fingers moving quickly. "We need to prepare before the airline speaks. And trust me, they will manipulate the narrative." Leah looked out the window. Denver was washed in sunset orange, and red streaks reflecting across the glass, the same colors as the blood Franklin coughed during his convulsion. Those images still echoed vividly. The violent jerk, the choking gasp, his body collapsing, the deadly silence, and Sarah standing between Leah and her patient, as if Leah were the danger. The weight of it pressed on her, but instead of forcing her down, it pushed her spine straighter. "I will not let them twist this," Leah said, her voice low but unshakable. Naomi paused, evaluating the woman beside her. This was not merely a doctor. This was someone on the brink of becoming the center of a battle far larger than herself. "Are you ready for a public fight against a major airline?" Leah turned toward her eyes, steady. "I did not choose this fight, but I will finish it." The car pulled up to the hotel. Leah stepped out. The cold wind lifted her hair, carrying the unmistakable sense that Denver's sky was preparing to release a storm. Not a storm of weather, a storm of truth, of justice, of public outrage that millions would feel when the full story emerged. And Leah Morgan, the woman Sarah once deemed unfit for business class, now stood at the storm's center, calm as if she had been born for it. Because from this moment on, the story was no longer about one passenger who nearly died, no longer about one discriminatory flight attendant, no longer about one chaotic flight in the sky. It was about a system, a prejudice, a truth buried too long, and a woman who had decided she would drag every piece of it into the light. The storm had begun, and Leah was the eye of it. Leah woke before the morning light could slip through the curtains. Not because of an alarm, but because her mind was still trapped between the moment Franklin stopped breathing and the moment the handcuffs snapped around her wrists. Her sleep had been short and heavy, but her resolve was sharper than ever. She turned on her phone. It vibrated non-stop like a small earthquake. Hundreds of messages, dozens of news alerts. The video of the confrontation on the plane had spread faster than the flight that brought them to Denver. The hashtag "Let the Doctor Work" was at the top of the charts. The hashtag "Flying While Black" flooded every platform. Clips filmed from multiple angles, Sarah blocking her Evan, fumbling Leah being stopped, Franklin convulsing all crystal clear, more undeniable than any excuse the airline could conjure. One video had more than 2 million views in just a few hours. National networks were already asking, why did the airline refuse to believe the doctor? Was this racial discrimination? Why was an emergency physician handcuffed after saving a life? Leah scanned the headlines, and a steady, controlled anger settled in her chest. Not explosive, not frantic, a cold, purposeful rage. A soft knock sounded at the door. Naomi entered with 2 coffees and a thick stack of documents. She set the cup in front of Leah. Even before opening her laptop, Naomi began direct and unfiltered. "They are scared. I have emails from 3 major networks requesting interviews, and more importantly, from the CEO of the airline." Leah frowned. "What does he want?" Naomi opened a file, her voice even and sharp. "They want to discuss a solution." Leah narrowed her eyes. "Meaning a fast settlement, with a confidentiality agreement. No disclosure, no lawsuit, no press." Leah glanced at her phone again, looking at the photo of herself in handcuffs beside a video where she fought to bring Franklin back. They wanted silence, but the truth was screaming. Naomi set the documents down. "I reviewed Mr. Hayes's condition." She paused before delivering the crucial point. "Franklin is still critical, because the initial response on that plane was too slow and incorrect. They know this could become a massive case." which means they will fight hard to twist the narrative in their favor. Leah's hand curled into a fist. No, they will fight hard to hide the part of the truth that costs them their power. Naomi did not disagree. Instead, she lifted her phone and opened a new message. Franklin was awake for a few minutes this morning. His wife wants to meet you. Leah closed her eyes. One part of her heart eased. Another part clenched tighter. Naomi stood. We need to go immediately. Franklin's family will be one of the strongest pieces of testimony, not just because they saw the outcome, but because they know what should have happened. They left the hotel and drove to Denver Health. When Leah stepped into the hospital room, Eleanor Hayes turned, rising the moment she recognized Leah, not with panic or anger, but with a gratitude so deep it trembled. Her eyes glistened, but her voice was steady. Dr. Morgan. Thank you. If you had not been there, my husband would not still be here. Leah shook her head gently. I only did what needed to be done. Eleanor gripped her arm firmly. What needed to be done is exactly what you did. What frightens me is that they tried to stop you. Franklin opened his eyes, weak but conscious. He studied Leah for several long seconds, as if imprinting her face into his memory. His voice was faint but clear. You saved me. Leah gave him a soft smile, but the moment was short-lived. The door swung open. A man in a grey suit entered the hospital's lead attorney, followed by 2 reporters Leah had certainly not invited. Naomi immediately stepped in front of Leah. No interviews, no recording, no photographs. The hospital attorney raised both hands, clearly trying to calm the situation. We are here to confirm that, if needed, the hospital will issue an official statement declaring the in-flight medical handling inappropriate. Leah glanced at Naomi, who nodded once. This was important, but something bigger was waiting outside. In the hallway, dozens of people had gathered. Many held signs. Let her work. Listen to Black Doctors' accountability now. Leah stepped into the hallway. The crowd fell silent for one long beat, then a single clap, then another, then waves of applause until the entire corridor thundered with the sound of public reckoning. A young woman stepped forward. I am a medical student. I want to become a doctor like you. I do not want the system to treat me the way they treated you yesterday. Leah looked at her, then at the whole crowd, and she understood. This battle was no longer hers alone. Naomi stood close beside her voice, low but certain. This is not just a lawsuit anymore. This is a movement. And if the airline thinks they can silence it with money or a polished press statement, they have no idea what they have awakened. Leah turned back her gaze, calm but glowing like metal pulled from flame. Then we will make them understand. They want to bury the truth. We will drag it into daylight. And in that moment, Leah understood what Sarah never had. No power is greater than truth once it stops being afraid. And the fight had just entered its explosive phase. The high-rise building housing the regional FAA office rose before them like a block of cold steel, motionless, yet carrying a kind of authority that made anyone who entered unconsciously change their breathing. Leah and Naomi walked through the main lobby, a wide and brightly lit space that still felt heavy, as if an unseen hand had settled on their shoulders. Not because they were afraid, but because they knew this was the place where the system wrote its official version of events. And today they had come to force that version back into its true shape. A receptionist led them into a private conference room where several FAA officials were seated, stacks of documents piled high like verdicts waiting for signatures. Naomi set her briefcase down. Leah sat opposite the panel, her gaze sharp as a blade, unwavering. The lead official, Mr. Klein, began, "Thank you for coming, Dr. Morgan. There are conflicting accounts that need clarification." Leah did not blink. The only conflict is between the truth and a false report. Klein leaned back, slightly studying her with the wary look of someone who suddenly realized the person across the table would not be easily cornered. Another FAA staffer opened a file. "We received statements claiming you refused to follow instructions, that you raised your voice, that you caused panic." Naomi replied instantly. "The video evidence disproves every one of those claims." She placed a USB drive on the table, like she was placing the decisive piece on a chessboard. The FAA had not even opened the file yet, but the atmosphere had already shifted. Tighter. Heavier. Everyone in the room understood that video was something no one could escape. Leah looked directly at them, her voice steady but carrying the suppressed fire beneath it. "If I hadn't intervened, passenger Franklin Hayes would be dead. And he nearly died, not because of his medical condition, but because a flight attendant attempted to stop me from treating him." Each word fell like a hammer. The FAA panel remained silent, and that silence alone told Leah they recognized exactly what was at stake, the liability of a system if bias could be proven. A woman on the panel asked, "Why do you believe they questioned your authority?" Leah answered without hesitation, "Because I didn't look like the kind of doctor they are used to believing." The room froze. Everyone knew her answer struck directly at the core issue. They were not certain they were ready to confront racial discrimination embedded in aviation culture. Before the session could move into formal questioning, the door swung open. A man entered wearing an airline badge. Not everyone recognized him, but Leah and Naomi did. It was the airline's vice president of operations, Daniel Mercer. He had not come to greet them, not to apologize. He was here to control damage. His tone carried the polished threat of a corporate executive accustomed to wrapping force inside polite packaging. "I believe we should discuss matters privately before this escalates." Naomi did not turn to him. "It needs to escalate." Mercer swallowed whatever he had wanted to say and redirected his attention to Leah. "We want to express goodwill. We have prepared a settlement proposal." Leah cut him off before numbers were even mentioned, her voice calm but sharp enough to stop Mercer mid-stride. "I am not here to sell the truth." The FAA officials looked up, as if unsure whether they had heard correctly. Mercer pulled out a chair and sat, trying to reclaim control. "You must understand the media is distorting," Leah interrupted again. "Distorting. It was your team who filed a false report to protect your flight attendant." Mercer leaned closer, lowering his voice. "This could damage your reputation." Leah met his eyes without flinching. In that moment, no one in the room doubted who held the actual power. "Mr. Hayes is alive because of me. My reputation protects itself. Yours does not." Mercer went completely silent. No excuses, no defense. He understood, and so did the FAA, that once the truth was recorded on video, no one could bury it. Just then, an FAA staffer hurried in and whispered into Klein's ear. Klein tightened his grip on his pen, then looked up. "We have just received confirmation from the hospital." Mr. Hayes stated that Dr. Morgan was the only person who knew what she was doing during the resuscitation, and that flight attendant, Sarah Whitfield, physically obstructed her. Mercer closed his eyes for a brief second, the defeat unmistakable. Klein continued, his tone heavier. and he has requested to testify if needed. That was the final cut the moment the airline's fabricated version of events collapsed. Naomi allowed herself a small smile, the kind worn by someone who just watched the battlefield flip. Leah sat straighter. Not triumphant. Not smug. Just the sharp quiet of justice beginning to awaken. Klein closed the folder. We will open a formal investigation into the airline and flight attendant Whitfield. And Dr. Morgan, there will be no charges against you. Leah nodded once. No gratitude, no relief. Truth does not need thanks. It only needs to be spoken. Mercer stood too quickly, knowing the airline had entered crisis. And Leah Morgan, the woman they had tried to blame, had become the force they could no longer contain. Naomi rose beside her, her voice low but metallic. This fight has only begun. Leah answered, her eyes fixed on the door. Mercer had just disappeared through no. It has only warmed up. When they stepped out of the conference room, the air no longer felt heavy. It was shifting, moving. As if something larger was pushing behind them, the outrage of the public, the certainty of the video, the force of people refusing to stay silent. Leah did not know what the next step would hold. She only knew one thing. They had underestimated her, and that mistake would be extremely costly. Leah stepped into the large hearing hall where the official FAA proceeding was underway, not to answer accusations, but to expose how a system had nearly killed a man because of bias. The air in the room was dense, like the fog before a storm. The airline's team of attorneys sat on one side, suits pressed expressions stiff. On the other side sat Leah Naomi and Dr. Daniel Cho. Behind them, the family of Franklin Hayes sat close together, silently but powerfully declaring, "We are here, and we saw everything." Leah took her seat at the witness stand. The recording light clicked on. Every eye turned toward her. She felt no fear, no tremor, no hesitation. For the first time since the incident, she was not speaking only for herself, but for everyone who had ever been doubted, because they did not look like the kind of person people trust. The airline's lawyer rose, attempting to reclaim control long lost. "Dr. Morgan, would you agree that the situation on board was chaotic, and that such chaos might have caused the flight attendant to misunderstand your intentions?" Leah looked at him. Her expression so calm the room seemed to cool. "No. There is no chaos that justifies stopping a doctor from treating someone who is dying. The only chaos came from their refusal to believe I was a doctor." A quiet gasp rippled through the audience, the sound of a crack forming in the wall of lies. The lawyer changed tactics. "You raised your voice. You overstepped the crew." Leah replied without even pausing. "When a patient's heart stops, speed is survival. Your words were slow. Their decisions were slow. But death is not slow." Silence dropped over the room like a weighted curtain. When the FAA played the recovered cabin video, the screen lit up with everything the airline had tried to hide. Sarah physically blocking Leah. Evan fumbling with the AED, placing it incorrectly. Franklin convulsing, collapsing while Leah was prevented from reaching him. And Sarah's face, not one of concern for a passenger, but of fear that her authority was being challenged. The room held its breath. It was the silence of truth, revealing its first undeniable page. FAA moved to the next witness, Dr. Daniel Cho. His voice carried no embellishment, only clinical fact, the kind no one could dispute. If not for Dr. Morgan's CPR, Mr. Hayes would have died. Had proper medical intervention been allowed from the beginning, he would not have sustained his current cardiac damage. the delay was the cause. He turned directly toward the airline's representatives. And that delay did not come from Dr. Morgan. An FAA member asked, "In your professional observation, where did the failure originate?" Daniel Cho did not hesitate, with flight attendant Whitfield refusing to acknowledge Dr. Morgan's medical authority. Sarah sat 3 seats away, her hands curled inward, shoulders collapsing, her face drained of color. Naomi stepped to the podium, her voice a finely honed blade. "Let me clarify, Dr. Cho. If the person being dismissed had not been a black woman, but a middle-aged white man in a suit, would this have happened?" The airline's lawyer shot up. "Objection." FAA responded instantly. "Dr. Cho may answer." He looked at Leah, then at the entire hall. No. Bias directly influenced the flight attendant's decision. A wave of recognition swept the room. Not surprise. Confirmation. When Franklin was rolled in as the final witness, the atmosphere shifted immediately. His body was weak, but his eyes were proud, clear, and heavy with moral weight. He looked at Leah first, giving her a small nod, a thank you that needed no words. Then he faced the FAA panel. His voice was rough but steady. "I remember the moment I was dying. I could not see faces, but I could hear. I heard Dr. Morgan say she was a doctor. I heard her being denied. And I heard the young man say, 'I do not know what to do.'" The entire room tightened, as if one collective heartbeat faltered. Franklin continued, "If she had not pushed past that flight attendant, I would not be sitting here. And if this system allows that to happen again, there will be more people like me who are not as lucky." One FAA board member set down their pen as though they had just found the missing piece of their final report. When the hearing recessed for the panel to deliberate, Naomi turned to Leah. "You just forced an entire industry to face something they have avoided for years." Leah did not smile, did not gloat. She simply said, her voice low, like water before the wind rises, "I have not done anything except tell the truth they refused to look at." When the board returned, the chair read the preliminary decision. "The FAA will issue a report finding that the airline violated safety protocols, obstructed lawful medical assistance, and will temporarily suspend flight attendant Whitfield." He looked directly at Leah. "And Dr. Morgan, we thank you." A round of applause rose. Not loud, but slow, deep, weighty. The kind of applause not for a hero, but for someone who exposed a truth everyone knew existed, yet no one dared confront. Leah stood. She did not bow. She did not look away. She had not won. She had not ended anything. She had opened the first door, and behind that door lay an entire system beginning to shift into a new shape, one where people like Leah would finally have the place they deserved. From the perspective of a specialist in systemic justice, Leah Morgan's story does not merely expose the failure of a single flight attendant or even one airline. It reveals how power can be misused when bias seeps into procedure, turning moments that demand clarity into catastrophes that nearly cost a man his life. Leah's courage reminds us that change does not come from silence, but from the moments when one individual dares to stand up and force an entire system to confront itself. If you believe that truth deserves protection and that competence must be respected, please like and subscribe to help carry forward stories with the power to awaken. And leave a short comment with the phrase, "Stand strong," to affirm that you choose to stand on the side of justice.